What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast happy hour. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Sorry for being 1 minute late. A couple technical difficulties we fought through. We're going to have Russell Brown joining us in just a moment as well. But until then, I've got two amazing guests joining me at the moment. The first one you know and love. His name is Jacob Westendorf, owner of Game On Wisconsin, writer for Packer Report. You can follow him on Twitter at Jacob Westendorf. And of course, we also have our great friend, Lee Platte. He is famous on Twitter as @MathBomb. He works for Pro Football Network and creator of the ever so famous RAS score, RAS, whatever you want to call it. It is something that Packer fans are extremely familiar with because if you didn't know better, you would swear that Goody was using it most of the time. But Jacob, Kent, how the heck are you guys doing?
Fantastic, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, TGIF.
Seriously, especially for two teams like the Packers and Lions, who definitely are in need of a Friday vibe and could definitely use a victory Monday, this coming Monday. Fortunately, I don't even know. They'll probably find a way to tie and just let everyone down. But fortunately, one of the two teams will likely have a victory Monday, and we should have hopefully something good to chat about. But we've got a lot to discuss. We're going to go over a ton of different things from obviously the Lions side of things, from you, Kent, and we'll bring in Russ as well, hopefully eventually. We'll go through some key matchups. But I think probably the hottest thing off the presses is, of course, the injury report. I'll start with the Packers side of things. Devondre Campbell and Shamar Jean-Charles both going to be out for this game. David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Alan Lazard, Preston Smith, and Christian Watson, just those minor players, are all listed as questionable. For the Lions, Chase Lucas, Fatu Melifonwu, and Matt Nelson, as well as A.J. Parker, all listed as out. Taylor Decker, Charles Harris, DeAndre Swift, and Brock Wright listed as questionable. Kent, I will start with you. How nervous should we be that Brock Wright is questionable in this game? In all seriousness, tell us about the injury report for the Lions.
Yeah, Brock Wright's going to be the guy because they traded away TJ Hawkinson, but Wright is also an undrafted free agent. He was brought in to be a blocker, and he's a pretty decent blocker, but he's not like a game-changing tight end. This isn't a guy who's going to come in and take over the game. So it's unfortunate that he's hurt at literally the worst time a tight end could possibly be hurt. But I'm not sure that it's going to have too much impact on what the Lions are going to do. The real impact is going to be how they use their blockers. They'll probably use an extra tackle more. They already use one more than most teams, but we might see that in excess this weekend.
Russ, welcome in. Appreciate you joining us. Russ is a national scout for Cover One. You can follow him on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Russ, we were just talking about the injury report. We started with the Lions first. Obviously, lots of injuries on this list. Where's your level of concern with the injuries? Do you think like a DeAndre Swift's going to play, Taylor Decker, Charles Harris? And where's your thoughts at with the injury report for the Lions?
I can't start on the TJ Hawkinson thing first, or...
Oh, we'll get there.
No, I'm just joking around. No, I mean, look, Brock is fine. I mean, I think he'll be limited to a sense with the injuries and everything that he's dealing with. And Taylor Decker, I'm definitely concerned. I think that stuff is going to linger, potentially to groin, lower body stuff. I could see him being potentially shut down for the season. I mean, he's got a potential out after this year. They would save close to $9 million or $12 million this year, and then $9 million the following year if they let him go or traded him or something like that. When you think about a veteran like that with Taylor Decker, would you really want that guy? I mean, you want to keep that guy, but would that guy want to stay within this organization that's already shipped off TJ Hawkinson, one of their most consistent pieces on the offense? You're not winning football games, especially on the road with Dan Campbell. I think that's something that we look at season long with the Lions. So I don't think we'll see Decker. Maybe we'll see Brock a little bit. I will say I'm really interested to see what the Lions do with James Mitchell at the tight end position. He was somebody that played 5 snaps last weekend, somebody that I think we'll see a little bit more of, and maybe that's why they decided to pull the trigger on a Hawkinson trade, because they knew, okay, if we have this guy kind of waiting in the wings. I think Mitchell was somebody that we would have talked about a lot more in April anyways, had he not torn the ACL. So I think he's somebody that they've got waiting in the wings, and maybe we'll see more of him on Sunday. It would be nice to see that Jameson Williams was activated, but that's not the case. So I guess we'll wait a couple more weeks for that one. And maybe when we close out the season against the Packers, maybe we'll see J-Mo.
Yeah, I was going to say Jameson Williams, probably one of the lone Christmas presents under the tree remaining for the Lions. One thing that they haven't been able to unwrap yet and should get to see at some point. So that should be really fun. Jacob, I'll have you take it over from a Packers standpoint. Obviously, Campbell being out will be a big loss for this team. And we can't say for sure. Bakhtiari and Jenkins, probably going to be game time decisions along with Alan Lazard, Preston Smith, a late questionable, and then Christian Watson seems like he may be leaning towards being able to play. But what are your thoughts on this Packers injury report?
Yeah, the two tackles is what they called them at the beginning of the year, but now it's the left side of the offensive line with Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins. We still haven't seen an extended run of those two guys playing together. This Detroit pass rush certainly has some potential and ability to get after the quarterback. And honestly, with the Packers, it starts up front. I know everybody wants to talk about the receivers and everything like that, but probably the biggest disappointment throughout this year, and Andy, you've chronicled this pretty extensively, is that they've struggled on the offensive line pretty handily. And some of that due to guys being in and out of the lineup. If those two guys can go, Bakhtiari, Jenkins, Myers, John Runyon, and Yosh Nijman from left to right is pretty good. If one of those guys can't go, you're talking about Zach Tom playing left tackle, left guard. It's kind of an unknown as to what those guys are going to be able to do. On the other side of the ball, the Drake Campbell thing is interesting. Not that he's having this fantastic year like he had last year, where he was one of the best players on the team, but now you're talking about the green dot going to rookie Quay Walker. And I'm wondering, how is that going to look with a guy who sometimes looks like he's thinking more than he's playing? And now you're adding in an element where he has to think even more because he's getting the signals from Joe Barry. He's getting everything on the sidelines. Now, it's something he did do in the preseason, so it's not completely foreign to him, but we're talking let's say there was 3 games and he played 10 snaps a game. That's 30 snaps. He was able to take that. The Lions most likely are going to run more than 30 plays this weekend. So I think that is really interesting. And then the Christian Watson factor being, it was a guy they said they had a big part of the game plan dedicated to last week, and then he gets injured on his first reception, hopefully able to go with a concussion. Just not a guy whose career has been able to get off the ground as of yet. Just struggled with injuries through camp, got hurt early in the season. They shut him down for a while. He comes back, he gets hurt again. I think all of those guys, like you mentioned, none of them are minor players. It's not like they have a guy in the injury report. Okay, maybe like Shamar John Charles is out. That's a minor player. But other than that, those are some really big names, and honestly something that between teams that level of play hasn't been that drastically different, that could swing the game one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the injuries are certainly a big talking point, and obviously all the questionable players for both the Lions and the Packers. A 10:30 a.m. Noteworthy inactives list will definitely be worth keeping an eye on, because as you mentioned, Jacob, that certainly could swing the game one way or the other of which of these players is available to go. I'm glad you covered all the other ones, because the one that I actually wanted to focus on a little bit from a Packers side of things is actually Alan Lazard, because I do think, and I'm sure Russ and Kent, you guys are probably going to be talking about the Lions secondary and the struggles in the secondary. They fired their defensive backs coach this week. But I think probably the player that Rodgers has the most confidence in and has the ability to maybe take advantage of some of those issues in the Lions secondary is Alan Lazard. And I think if he's in there, that's going to open up a lot more opportunity for this Packers passing game. If not, now you've got kind of a Lions defensive backfield that's been struggling versus a lot of young, rookie, inexperienced wide receivers that, while should maybe still be able to take advantage of it, maybe not to the fullest extent as if you had guys like Lazard and Randall Cobb, who Rodgers has a little bit more trust in. So Lazard definitely going to be the one. And it had been noted on Friday that he's going to be a game time decision. So I think that's really probably, and listen, not to say that Bakhtiari, Jenkins, Preston Smith, Christian Watson, that those aren't big enough names to keep an eye on the inactives list already. But I think Alan Lazard has the ability to play a big role in this game if he is active. All right, injury aside, Russ, I know you are chomping at the bit to talk some TJ Hawkinson. We'll talk about the trade deadline for a minute here, because the Lions notably traded away TJ Hawkinson in the division. Thanks a lot, jerks, to the Minnesota Vikings. He will still stay in the division in the NFC North. Meanwhile, the Packers did all of nothing at the trade deadline, which has certainly been noteworthy as well. But Russ, since you are chomping at the bit to talk some TJ Hawkinson, your thoughts on the trade of Hawkinson from the Lions to the Vikings?
Absolutely hate it. Hate it. And I know some people are like, look, man, they're never going to re-sign him. He's not worth $14-15 million per year. I get all of that stuff. I understand the nature of the business, but let's just call it what it is. This team is going to be going after a rookie quarterback this year. Maybe they don't. I mean, but it's all pointing that way. I mean, you're not winning with Jared Goff. He's limited to so much, and like you put pieces around him. Some of the pieces are healthy, some of them are not. Either way, it's just not happening. You're not winning football games. He's not winning on the road. It is what it is. Like, you have to start winning football games. So you're going to go out and get a rookie quarterback in 2023. That rookie quarterback is going to be under a rookie deal for 5 years. You could have re-signed TJ Hawkinson to a 4-year deal. And when that deal was coming up, you would essentially be getting ready to sign your rookie quarterback to a large extension if everything goes right. But most people say tight ends, when they get that first big contract or that second NFL contract, if you will, after the rookie one, they tend to kind of get into their own and they figure it out. And maybe Hawkinson was going to do that. Maybe Hawkinson wasn't. But either way, he's kind of putting up like Tyler Higbee type numbers, which isn't too bad. I think you can live with that in this game. And you get what you like. You get consistent numbers out of him. It's not like you were getting one game with no receptions, the next game with 1 receptions, and then he would go off. It was a pretty steady 4 or 5 receptions a game. And I get it. Like, it didn't seem like he was a focal point in this offense. Well, at the same time, like, he just wasn't getting the ball, but now he's been getting fed the football. Good things are happening. He leads tight ends in the NFL with over 20-yard receptions at 11. And you let this guy go. And I just, like, middle of the season, it doesn't make sense to me when you're fighting and scratching, clawing, trying to win games, showing grit, everything that they preach from Hard Knocks on, and you let this guy go for 2nd and 3rd round pick. You have to give up draft picks to do it. How does the locker room respond to that, especially guys that want to be there, want contract extensions? How do they know what their future is going to be when a talented player like Hawkinson was given up for a 2nd and 3rd round pick? Meanwhile, Brad Holmes, he's had 2 drafts, both 2nd round picks. We don't even know anything about these guys. Levi's basically retired. Josh Paschal's slowly getting onto the football field, but I still didn't like that pick when they made it. I like Josh Paschal, the player. I didn't like it for them. They weren't a team that I felt like needed to double down on the defensive end position because I thought they needed help offensively when there was quarterbacks available. I liked Nakobe Dean in that spot. There's so much that goes into this. And with Hawkinson now gone, I mean, you could easily have said he was one of the 3 best players on this team, specifically on the offensive side of the football, and now he's gone. And you did it in the middle of the season where you're 1-6. I don't see how that helps your offense when they've struggled to score in the second half of games. The last 3 weeks, they haven't scored points in the second half. So it makes no sense to me. The timing was weird, trade deadline or not, just weird all the way around for a team that took him in the first round a couple years ago, regardless of regime.
Kent, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually disagree. I'm okay with the trade. I think they could have went one way or the other, whether they kept him or left him, but they weren't going to re-sign him. He wasn't going to be brought back. They're in the middle of a rebuild, and a tight end isn't the kind of thing you rebuild around. There are only 3 tiers of tight ends when it comes to receiving. You're either in that elite tier that your Kelseys and your Kittles, or you're not, or you're bad. That's it. That's all 3 tiers of tight ends. And Kittle's in that second tier. He's not an elite tight end, and he hasn't really shown the ability to be in that elite tier. He's had 2 games in his career where you're like, wow, he could really be the guy, and no other games. So I don't think that he was going to be a big part of the rebuild. I think getting essentially 1 3rd-round pick back, when you do all the value and stuff, it comes out to just a 3rd-round pick. I think that's okay value for a decent starting tight end. They probably could have got a little bit more. I don't like that they didn't gain picks. They kept the same number of picks. But I don't think that the team really values the tight end position that much. Brad Holmes didn't when he was with the Rams, and he's shown really no indication that he values that position at all here. They brought in Mitchell as a late-round pick, and they put Brock Wright, who had more receptions as a rookie in the NFL than he had his entire college career. So they don't really value that position that much. And it is a good sign long term if you look at this as they've been planning for a 4 or 5 year rebuild, but no one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear that this is a long term rebuild because those suck. Those are never fun. They're always terrible for the fan base. We've got to live through a lot of bad years, and like Russ was mentioning, Jared Goff he's just not the dude. He can manage as long as everything is fine around him. But once you start getting injuries and things start to go a little bit south, he crumbles. And you can't do anything with that other than coast. And this is not a coasting team. The Lions can't coast anything. They don't have the personnel. They just can't do it. So it's a middle of the road trade for me. I don't think they would have made the trade now if they were winning some football games. If they were at 3 or even probably about 3 wins, I don't think they would have made that trade. I think they would have tried to at least get through this year before they traded him or planned on getting past him. But as it is, it's a lost season. They're just trying to get as many higher assets as they can for next year. And they're probably not going to use one of those on a tight end, but hopefully they'll have a plan going forward.
I just love that you mentioned that the Lions don't value the tight end position when their head coach is a former tight end and former tight ends coach.
Weird.
That's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Here's a couple things, just from an outsider's point of view. Obviously, I'll lean on you guys, although it seems like there's obviously differing opinions on it. First of all, I think this is why buyer beware whenever you draft a tight end early, because it does feel like it's just a position that when tight ends start really playing well is usually into the start of their second contract. And the ROI that you get on that first contract for a tight end is usually pretty tough. And then you get into these situations where you're like, all right, do we sell and get what we can now? And just like, it always feels like you're wanting for a little bit more in that first contract. But because I do think that tight ends have the ability to start really picking things up, maybe a little bit later, their third, fourth, fifth season, it would give me a little bit more pause of like, hey, do we maybe want to give him a couple of years to see if he all of a sudden does have that sort of impact? But maybe more importantly is, while Detroit has struggled, they've won one game. It does feel like, and I know it's been tapering off a little bit as of late, partially due to injuries, but it does feel like this is a team that has been able to put up points on offense and that has some young talent, whether it's Penei Sewell, TJ Hawkinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Swift, etc. It just feels like at some point you have to get a foothold somewhere and you have to have something that you can build around. And I get that Jared Goff probably not the long-term answer, right? But if at least you have a running back, a tight end, a wide receiver, and some pieces that you can start in, like a tackle that you can start feeling pretty darn good about, you can start building something. And they're having games where they early in the season against the Eagles and the Seahawks, where they're scoring 30, 40 points in those games. It's like, okay, we have a vision for this. Clearly the defense needs a lot of work. Clearly the overall team is not winning football games yet, but you kind of have to start somewhere. And it felt like they were just finally kind of getting a grasp of something that they could sink their teeth into offensively. And then they trade away TJ Hawkinson. And how much of a part of that, offensive, explosion or whatever you want to call it in the first couple of weeks, like he was a part of, it can be debated, but it just felt like they were finally getting something that they could actually go towards. They haven't even had Jameson Williams yet. And that could actually be a really fun offense with Jameson Williams and those guys to build around. So I was surprised a little bit by it. I get it, but either way, it's an interesting. Jacob, did you have something to add?
Just my take on it was, I think, I wrote it after the deal was made, was I think, Hawkinson's a guy who, there were people in that draft class calling him like one of the best players, like one of the 3 to 5 best players in that draft, to which I was like, okay, so he's kind of always been overrated to me since he was drafted. That being said, the only thing that I would caution is, I understand wanting to trade a player for assets that you're not going to keep. However, from an outsider's perspective, looking at it and how a player might even look at it is, you drafted this guy 8th overall, and I think it was 8th, it was in the top 10. You drafted this guy early. He's a solid player for you. And then you just kind of cast him aside after 3.5 seasons and trade him to a division rival, which is like kind of a no-no, so to speak. It kind of is, allegedly, it's supposed to like say what you kind of think about that player. Well, when you do that, Detroit is already a place that struggles to attract players or gets the bad rap of a bad organization. That's a thing that they're already fighting. So then when you take one of the players on your team that's pretty good and cast them away for a 2nd and 3rd round pick, or, what Blake Snell in baseball might call a slapstick draft pick, to clean that up a little bit, that's going to be a tough look around the league for other players. So maybe if they're in the running for a free agent, it's like, well, I'm picking between Detroit and some other franchise. They might pick the other one because the reputation is we get rid of those guys, and every team does that to some degree, but that's just a tough look when the whole idea is supposed to be you draft these guys, and if they're good, you sign them and keep them long-term. But it was strange to see him go to Minnesota. Just because, like I said, if you're trading within the division, like I remember way back when the Eagles traded Donovan McNabb to the Washington football team, and it was just like, well, they clearly think that he doesn't have anything left anymore. And McNabb had nothing left anymore. Like if you're trading a quarterback within the division, this is a little different, but I'm interested to see how he'll do. Minnesota, those picks don't matter much. They're 6-1. They have basically a 5-game lead in the division at this point. They need to go for it. They've never won a title, and those banners fly forever. Detroit, rebuilding since 1957, man.
Very much so. Let's talk a little bit more. Well, let's talk quickly about the Packers not making a move at the trade deadline. Kent, I'll start with you. From an outsider's point of view, what was your thought of Green Bay not making a move?
The Packers have always been an organization that wants to build through the draft. And we always talk about that as a thing, right? Everybody wants to build through the draft, but nobody has embodied that more than the Packers have. And not making a trade at the deadline can be read a number of different ways. I don't think they were inactive in the trade market. I just don't think they were successful in the trade market. It's a relatively frugal franchise. They don't necessarily offer the types of big paydays that you're going to expect to see from those big blockbuster trades. The Packers are potentially looking at moving on from Aaron Rodgers at some point, whether that's with Love or somebody else, but they really can't afford to go throwing picks around unless they're in the running for another ship. And they don't look like they are right now. They look like a team that's in the middle of a transition, even though it's kind of the beginning of one. So I don't feel like it's that big of an issue. It isn't the greatest as a fan because you want to see them do something to try to win. And they didn't really pull off anything that gave any kind of flash. But as an outsider looking in, that's pretty par of the course for the Packers and that long-term perspective of continually trying to build, thinking down the road. At least that's what you want to think as a Packers fan, I'm sure, and what I would hate to see as a Lions fan. But the Packers as a franchise have always been, a couple of drafts ahead when they're talking about planning. And I think that's more why they wouldn't have made a move is because they're thinking more about what those picks can net in terms of long-term team building.
Russ, what about you?
I honestly kind of expected them to do the same thing, pretty much nothing. But at the same time, I got my hopes up as just like a football fan. And as I've done so much over the years with Pack-A-Day, with the draft and everything, I've always just viewed it from the football perspective, not my disliking for Packers. But it's, I thought Brandon Cooks was going to be that guy. I thought that was going to be the name that they pulled out. And he's been dealt so much over the course of his career. And it's everything I've heard was like turmoil. They don't want him. He doesn't want to be there anymore. And then they didn't end up making the deal. And as we saw last night, he basically was like, I'm not playing. And they benched him and he sat and didn't play, whatever. But I thought with everything that was going on with Randall Cobb and the injuries and some of the things that have been piled up, Christian Watson not being able to stay healthy, obviously the thing with Alan Lazard coming up right now, I thought, hey, there's a chance that Brandon Cooks was going to be that guy, and that wasn't the case. So other than that, it's pretty much how they are, right? Don't make a whole lot of noise on trade deadline day. And if anything, like I said, Brandon Cooks was probably going to be that guy.
Cooks is going to have a great footnote to Brandon Cooks' career, because when you have an offseason where you're like, Brandon Cooks wasn't traded, and that's the weird thing, that's such a weird career, man. Yeah. You could write a whole book on that.
Mm-hmm. Brandon Cooks has had one of the more bizarre, fun, crazy careers, and it would have been even one more footnote in it if he played for the Packers. But we'll see what happens with that contract and with the Texans as well. They've got an interesting scenario there. Jacob, I haven't had a chance to hear your take on the Packers deadline or lack thereof making a move.
Yeah, in a vacuum, not making a deal is something I can understand the frustration with. I can understand all that. The problem is I look at it kind of through the lens of like how a baseball team looks at their team. This Packers team hasn't earned the right for the team to give up assets for an addition. I mean, they're 3-5. They haven't, and Andy, you've talked about this a lot. They're a snap here or there away from, potentially being 1-7 or whatever that ends. I mean, they haven't played well. And I think this is a long-term standing issue that the Packers have had, that they're built poorly. I made the comment earlier in the week that Brian Gutekunst has kind of built this team to win a Big Ten championship as opposed to a Super Bowl. One significant investment in the passing game before this season, which was Amari Rodgers. The others, if you want to call them significant, being Jay Sternberger, didn't work out. Josiah DeGuara, if you want to call that a significant investment, you can. And then Jordan Love. So when you do all that, I don't know. Gutekunst has just kind of gone one way, then the other, then one way, then the other again. In this offseason, he signs Aaron Rodgers to an extension. Devontae Adams subsequently says he doesn't want to play in Green Bay anymore, which is fine. It just kind of got the Packers caught with their pants down. Typically, they've been, like Kent said earlier, 2-3 drafts ahead. They weren't. That team was never prepared if Devontae Adams ever – like everything they did was just like, well, they got Devontae. So, like, if they keep Devontae, they're fine. But then Adams says he doesn't want to be here. Your plan to replace him is Sammy Watkins and 2 rookies, one from North Dakota State and one from Nevada. That's a lot to ask. And then you get – the whole purpose of this LaFleur regime was supposed to be to make Aaron Rodgers not have to be Superman. And now for this offense to be successful, he kind of has to be. Like the whole thing. Gutekunst even said in his offseason presser, like, well, you know, the quarterback can elevate the players around him. Can 12 do that anymore? Maybe not to the same level that he used to be able to. The names that were tossed around, Brandon Cooks, it seems like from a monetary standpoint, that was something that just wasn't ever going to be able to happen because the salary was guaranteed, all that sort of stuff. That's what Ken Ingalls is for, not me. Claypool, that was a sigh of relief when I heard Chicago got him for a second-round pick. Like if the Packers had traded a second-round pick for Chase Claypool, especially considering the 3-5 Packers, like if the 2021 Packers at 7-1 trade a second-round pick, you're just kind of like, okay, well, that pick should be in the 60s. They're trying to make it pick number 64 because they win a Super Bowl. But this team, that could be a top 40 pick. I mean, it might not be. There's still time to turn the season around, but that could be a top 40 pick. And this Packers team, what if Aaron Rodgers retires this offseason? You know, now you're talking about a lot of talent that needs to come onto this team, and they'll need as many of those high picks as they could possibly get because this roster will look very different if Aaron Rodgers is not around. And even if he is, it'll probably look very different. So I understand the frustration because Gutekunst did push all of his chips in the center, so to speak, with Aaron Rodgers, but I also say that the team hasn't earned the right to have that. So that's kind of the way that it went at the trade deadline.
Yeah, outside of the Bills game, at least prior to the Bills game, this was the easier part of the schedule, right? And it feels like if they would have been 6-2, 7-1, probably a time to be a bit more aggressive. And you know what? If it's going to cost a little bit more, you know you're sort of in an all-in situation already. Screw it. You know, F them picks. You know, go get guys that can help you win a Super Bowl this year. When you're 3-5 coming off a 4-game losing streak and have, you know, a loss to the Commanders in there, it doesn't look great, right? So it's really tough to like be like, yeah, we should give up a bunch of future stuff to, you know, try to clog the leak as best as possible, even though you know you're taking on too much water as it is. So don't necessarily hate the decision. Would have been intrigued if they would have added a player that could have specifically maybe been a spark plug for this offense, but I think he ultimately made the right decision. I want to talk a little bit more about this game coming up on Sunday, Packers. Russ, I will start with you here. Just want to ask you the state of the Lions secondary. Obviously, they fired their secondary coach this week, making some changes there. Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator, obviously has a background in being a great defensive back and coaching defensive backs. What's the status of their defensive backs? Why has it been so poor? And do you think they can get it turned around in 1 week after firing their head coach or their defensive backs coach, excuse me?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to get turned around too quickly. I mean, I just, there's not a lot of optimism there. There's not a lot of hope. Jeff Okudah seems to be like really the only defender that is relatively consistent on a weekly basis. Losing Tracy Walker earlier this year to the Achilles injury was really brutal. You know, hopefully he's back healthy next year. We'll see. But losing him, that's the one that hurts the most. Deshaun Elliott is a guy that's starting to kind of get his way back into the roster, into the starting lineup as he's coming back from his finger injury. He practiced earlier this week, and I think we'll see him back. So we'll see what happens there. But you're putting a lot of trust in a guy like Kirby Joseph, a rookie from Illinois that I really liked. I loved his ball skills coming out, but he hasn't really showcased those skills yet. And for a secondary that already lacked talent, there's a lot of injuries with guys like, you know, AJ Parker, who hasn't practiced this week. Chase Lucas was a 7th rounder, an undrafted free agent. I can't remember, but he was somebody that we took real late in the draft process this past year. And, you know, there was a lot of hope for him in the preseason and through Hard Knocks. He hasn't really made any impact. There's no real threat. Like when you play certain teams, like when you play the Packers, you're like, all right, I got to worry about Eric Stokes and Jair Alexander. When you play the Rams, you got to worry about Jalen Ramsey. When you play the Eagles, you got Darius Slay. There's so many different names across the NFL where you got to worry about it. Here, sure, you got to worry about Okudah, but it always seems like guys are open, and maybe that will change with Aaron Glenn now that Aubrey Pleasant. It seemed like there was a big communication issue with the way he was coaching to players and things like that. But I look at this and I see if Lazard is playing and if Romeo Doubs continues to kind of have the target share that he's getting, he had a good game against Buffalo last week. When you look at just overall production, I think that's going to be similar here. And really, you see that the Packers, if they start using running backs, good things happen, right? Like, Aaron Jones goes off 20 carries for 134 yards. He gets a ton of receptions against the Lions. He's got 4 receiving touchdowns against the Lions, most of any team that he's played against in his career. I think you're going to see a lot more utilization there. And there's going to be this trust of Alex Anzalone having to probably try to cover Aaron Jones out of the backfield. Probably not going to go very well. We'll see what Aiden Hutchinson does against the offensive line. That's, somebody to really pay attention to. But the secondary, this is the 32nd ranked secondary. It's 32nd ranked defense. If Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, if this offense doesn't put it together this week, you guys are like, the scene from the Titanic on the door in the ocean. You guys are past that. He's floating away and it's over. I mean, if you don't light us up, I don't know what to say.
If only the Lions could somehow find a player like Darius Slay in the draft process and get him into Detroit, and imagine right? What he could do. Kent, obviously, Russ just kind of went through a full scouting report for the team. I think you focused a little bit more on the defensive side, but just tell us about this Lions team, where they're at, some of their strengths, some of their struggles.
Yeah, he covered most of it, so I don't even have to do a whole lot of work here. One thing I would add is that Aiden Hutchinson is very good as a rookie, and he's been doing a really good job. The thing about this defense, though, is he's the only one. There's nobody else on that defensive line that has been doing a dang thing. Pascal came in and had a pretty good debut, but he's in a different role, and it might not be the same type of result every week. So, we just got to kind of feel that out. But if you can shut down Hutchinson, you don't really have a whole lot else to worry about on that defensive front. And Aaron Rodgers loves having some time. The offensive side of the ball, losing Hutchinson's a big deal because that's a reliable target. But that just means that they're going to find a different way to do that. This team runs through their run game. Everything that they do goes from the run. And you guys are going to get a healthy dose of Jamal Williams and Craig Reynolds. Whoever they are able to trot out, because the offensive line is good enough, even with the backups that they have in half the time, they're good enough at getting that run game going. And it's a very creative type of run game. It's not just players overpowering players. There's a lot of really good design in there. And it's really fun to watch that type of offense. It's the only real identity that this team has. It's year 2, the team's still trying to find their way. They're trying to build that identity. But that's something that they have going for them, and I don't think that stops anytime soon. The problem is that they don't have anybody that's a real game breaker at any level of their offense. That's what Jameson Williams is brought in to do, and he's just not healthy yet. DJ Chark was brought in to be that kind of temporary fill-in for that particular role, and he hasn't been healthy or producing when he is. It's basically Jared Goff throwing to a possession-type receiver in Josh Reynolds because he's very comfortable throwing to him, and Josh Reynolds is pretty good at coming down with contested-type catches. And Amon-Ra St. Brown finding those little openings in defenses and finding ways to get those little catches. But none of those things by themselves can run an offense in any kind of dynamic manner. It's all just pieces of a dynamic offense, but not the big pieces. And that's where this team really struggles, is finding those big pieces. Hawkinson was one of the only guys that provided that, and he's gone now. I don't think that this team is going to be able to put enough together to beat the Packers. And like Russ said, if you guys can't light up this defense, I mean, they had 5 defensive backs injured in one game this year. So they're not staying healthy, and they're already not a great unit to begin with. And I don't think that Russ went into it too much, but the Lions' best cornerback from last year was Amani Oruwariye.
I was just going to ask, what happened to him?
I have no idea. I have never seen someone completely forget how to play a position faster than
It's crazy.
Eric Stokes kind of did it, right?
So maybe maybe he figures it out now. Maybe there was something wrong with the way that he was working with Aubrey Pleasant, and he'll get some things turned back on. But I have no idea what happened to Amani Oruwariye, the player. He went from potentially getting a Pro Bowl nod last year. He had 6 interceptions. He was a fantastic player last year, and he's just struggling with the most basic stuff this year. It's wild watching this kind of stuff happen in real time. Thankfully, Jeff Okuda has been pretty good, so we can at least lean on that.
Russ, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say Amani can't even line up right. I mean, he's off sides like by a mile. I've never I've seen some guys off sides, not at corner though. I mean, I get press man, but geez Louise, man, get it right.
They're actually making a Space Jam football movie, and he actually got his talent stolen, which is what's going on with Aruria. He just completely forgot how to play. So, Jacob, I want to start kind of going over some of the key matchups in this game as we start looking ahead to Packers-Lions. Is there a matchup or just a key to this game that you're going to kind of be keeping an eye on early?
Yeah, Kent mentioned that the Lions run through their running game. Dan Campbell, I mean, you look at Dan Campbell and you're like, that dude wants to run the ball and play physical. And like, he just looks like the physical embodiment of that head coach. And then he opens his mouth and it just makes perfect sense, everything that he says. So not only that, like I mentioned, Jamal Williams is my best friend. So since him and DeAndre Swift, if he can go, the Packers, I mean, they don't even have a passable run defense. And I understand that they've put in a lot of their resources to get after the quarterback, rush the passer, stuff like that. But the teams that are willing to commit to their running game can certainly give this defense fits. The Packers do not dominate up front. The next edge that Rashawn Gary sets in this little half of the season might be the first one. So it's been a rough go. I mean, the Bills have no interest in running the ball at all. They add basically no resource. Well, I shouldn't say no resources, I guess, because they do that, but they don't have any interest in running the ball, and they ran for, I think it was like 8 yards of crack last week against the Packers. And Devondre Campbell's now not playing. Maybe that's better for them. I don't know. He hasn't been particularly good against the run either. Joe Barry said earlier this week he won't bench Darnell Savage, which, I mean, as poor as Savage has been in the passing game, he's even worse in the run game. Josh Allen's hard to tackle, but like whatever that nonsense was on the 3rd and 14 scramble, that still would be like, that guy wouldn't be able to live that down if I were the defensive backs coach, but that's the way that's gone. So if the Lions are willing to commit to their run game, this is the type of game where I think Green Bay kind of has to start fast and make the Lions feel like they have to be one-dimensional, because Goff is a sitting duck. So like if they can rush the passer and Taylor Decker's not playing, like Gary and Preston and those guys could rack up some quarterback pressures, quarterback sacks. They had some turnover regression last week that could finally go in some of their favor, but if they let the Lions commit to their running game, they will. And if they can commit and will commit to their running game, this is the type of game where like you're sitting at the end of it going, how are the Packers 3-6? And like, how bad is it they're losing to 1-6 Detroit? So can Green Bay slow that down? I don't know, and then add in Jamal Williams is a wild man. He doesn't need any extra motivation, but listening to the way he's talked about the Packers since he's been gone, not that he's upset with the way things went down or whatever, but he'd like to show them that, hey, you probably should have kept me too.
I will tell you that he had his worst career game last week, and he is probably not happy about fumbling twice when he's only ever fumbled once in his whole career.
That never in Green Bay, I don't think. I think
regardless of how he feels about
Green
Bay, he ain't coming in here happy. He wants to punch some people.
Ken, what's your key to this game?
It's really going to be the run game. The Lions don't have a lot of things going for them. If they can keep things together on their run game and keep things going and keep Goff clean, then they've got a chance. If the Packers are able to get any kind of pressure on Goff, this game is going to be over very fast. Goff, as I mentioned, has crumbled whenever he starts to get any kind of pressure. And if you start putting that up on him now when the team is sitting with only one win, he's going to start making mistakes really fast. And the defense isn't going to be there to bail him out. The run game is going to be the biggest key to this game for both teams, I think, because if the Lions can keep their run game going, they can keep it close. And if they can keep it close, all they got to do is have that last possession. And if they can just not make any mistakes on that last possession, that could be a win. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but if they are able to keep the run game together and they're able to keep it close, that's the biggest risk the Packers have, is if the Lions are able to keep it close.
Russ, what's your keys?
Well, I mean, kind of everything's been said. I mean, the run game is definitely huge. Outside of Nick Chubb, nobody's rushed for more touchdowns than Jamal Williams this year in the NFL. So I think that trend could potentially continue, especially when you look at just the overall rushing defense for the Packers. They do give up some yardage and things like that. So we'll see how that all goes down. But Amon-Ra St. Brown with Hawkinson now gone. He hasn't caught a touchdown pass since September 18th. I think that might change. He caught one last year against the Packers. So we'll see what happens with that. But ultimately, like I said, kind of with Romeo Doubs and Aaron Jones, if the Packers can utilize both those players, I think they're going to be just fine. We'll see, obviously, with Lazard if he's going to end up playing. As a fantasy owner of Big Bob Tanyan, I wouldn't mind seeing him getting involved a little bit because I really don't care if my team wins or loses anymore. They don't. I mean, I don't even think they care about winning or losing, and they're not going to make a run at this thing. They're not going to win 9 in a row and make the playoffs, so it doesn't matter. And I love doing these shows with you guys because when we talk Packers, you guys are so worried. And then I'm like, we watch a game and it's going to be 31-14. And I'm like, what the hell were they worried about? Like, there's nothing to worry about. Like, and I get it. You guys you're struggling, not the same old team that you normally are. You're seeing a team like the Vikings at 6-1 and you're used to being up there, but you have nothing to worry about.
Even if it was 31-14 Lions, you don't have anything to worry about in most cases.
Right.
One of the best stats of the 2020 season is the Packers led for 0 seconds against the Detroit Lions and won both games.
Mm-hmm. That'll be.
I think you're about to be introduced to a new Packers team, one that you maybe aren't quite as familiar with, the one that doesn't just have things on autopilot and can take advantage of things quite the way that they were used to. But I hope you're right. Don't get me wrong. I hope you're very much right because the Green Bay Packers could very much use a 31-14 victory just to get some confidence going. I really want to watch just Kenny Clark versus Frank Ragnow and Jonah Jackson on the Falcons side. Like, I think that's just a really fun battle. Kenny Clark, phenomenal season coming off his worst game of the year. He really struggled against Buffalo, but I think he's going to very much, in a very similar way to Jamal Williams, want to go out and smash some faces. And I think Ragnow and Kenny Clark is just great football, right? So I'm excited for that matchup. And we all talked about how important the running game is going to be, and Jamal Williams and the Lions rushing attack. And if Kenny Clark gets going and can cause some havoc up front and in the middle of that offensive line, I think that's going to give Green Bay a lot better chance in this game. All right, real quick before we get out of here, Jacob, your prediction for the game.
Yeah, I heard earlier today on another podcast that shall remain nameless because I listened to Pack-A-Day first, but this other one second. And that is, he said that the Packers will either win 31-14 or the Lions win 24-20. And Andy, you were talking about introducing these guys to a new Packers team. Something you said a couple weeks ago that stuck with me is, what is Green Bay good at? They don't run the ball enough. And even when they do, sometimes it's not the greatest of running games. They can't throw the ball down the field. They don't really protect the passer. They don't rush the passer as well as you would think they should with Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, and Preston Smith. They have a secondary that includes Jair Alexander, but Eric Stokes is playing the worst football of his young career. Rasul Douglas, and not quite the same player as he was last year. And the Lions, some of those players that we just talked about earlier have given the Packers fits. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of those types of players. And I can already see the deep crossing route that Justin Jefferson ran 27 times and was open all 27 of them against Green Bay and Minnesota. And then the Lions being able to lean on that run game, Jamal Williams running for over $1 with 2 touchdowns. I have no confidence in this Packers team, and I've seen nothing to inspire confidence in this Packers team. So I tend to lean more towards the 24-20 Lions route that anonymous podcaster said there. I'll be interested to see how it goes. One thing with Dan Campbell's team, especially in that building, they're going to play hard. They may not be the best team. They may not be the most talented team, but that whole thing about we're going to fight, scratch, bite kneecaps, all that stuff, they certainly do that from what I've seen from this Lions team. So I think Detroit wins. And it's largely because, like I said, I don't have much confidence in this Packers team. And if one team is more likely to curl up into a ball and quit, it's usually the road team anyways. And that's especially true when that road team is this Packers team. So I'll take Detroit.
Kent, how about you?
I mean, you literally explained both of the best scenarios for how this game might go, and I don't think that 24-10 or 24-20 scenario is the most likely, but we'll know before halftime if that's where it's headed. Because if the Lions are able to keep that run game going, they're just going to keep doing that. And if the Packers can't stop it, I don't think they're going to stop it because they just don't really have that capacity to do so. And they're in the middle, like I said, they're in the middle of what should be the beginning of a transition. So they've got a lot of players that are still struggling when they shouldn't be. And this is one of those trap games, right? A team that shouldn't lose, but probably could against a team that really has no business even being competitive. I'm not usually very confident about the Lions taking on the Packers. I'm not sure that they're going to win. But 24-20, I would put that on the Packers with that same score and be very confident that that's the type of game we could be watching. But I am excited, very excited to watch Frank Ragnow versus Kenny Clark. I'm glad you mentioned that because that is such an exciting matchup.
One of the things I always get frustrated at with myself is because I did a show with Glover Quinn, actually, former Detroit Lions safety, and that'll air tomorrow on the YouTube channel and I think on the audio one as well. But I already gave a prediction to him and now I can't remember what I said. And then I'll do another one tomorrow for my pregame show and I'll forget what I said on both of these. But I think I said 23-20 Packers to Glover Quinn. So I'm going to stick with that. I think this is going to be one of those another pesky and annoying games where it feels like the Packers should be doing better and they just aren't. I think the Lions will have the ability to go down and score. I think that's going to end with 2 touchdown drives and 2 field goal drives, probably just coming up a little bit short on a couple of those, maybe being the difference. I think Green Bay is going to have the ability to go down and score 2 touchdown drives. And I think that they get 3 field goal drives out of it, which could be the difference of the game. Assuming that maybe like all 3 of those field goals don't get blocked. I think Green Bay should be in a position to maybe win the game. And I'm going to say 23-20 Packers, but Russ, I will let you wrap our predictions up.
Well, Jamal Williams in both games against the Packers last year didn't do too hot, only had 43 yards rushing last year, had 25 yards in the first game. So, I mean, I'm not just I don't know, like I want to believe in Jamal. I really do, but I just don't know. But the Packers have scored over 30 on the Lions in 4 straight games. They haven't put up 27 points in a game yet this year. I think that changes. I'll take Packers 31-21 over the Lions.
All right. I like it. Really quick, before we get out of here, one last question for you. A lifetime supply of pizza on the line. There's no higher stakes. Who wins the next playoff game? Chicago Bears, the Green Bay Packers, or the Detroit Lions? Obviously, the Minnesota Vikings would be heavy favorites because they'll likely get a home playoff game this season. But outside of the Minnesota Vikings, in the division, lifetime supply of pizza on the line, who wins a playoff game next? Bears, Packers, or Lions? Jacob, I will start with you.
I think Aaron Rodgers is going to play football in 2023, and I think that the overwhelming likelihood is in Green Bay. I don't have a ton of confidence in the Bears to build a team around Justin Fields. And I mentioned the Lions have been rebuilding since 1957. You got the Lions, guys. They've won 1 playoff game since 1991. Is that right? Okay.
Yep.
That wasn't pouring salt in the wound. I really didn't remember the answer to that. So I'll take the Packers just because, like I said, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be around next year. And I pretty much picked them to win the division based on that alone. I feel like if they have like a 7-10, 6-11 type season, it'll be like a wake up call to do some things maybe a little bit differently, and have that opportunity to have a home playoff game or something like that again. And heck, they could even make the playoffs this year. I wouldn't bet on that, but they certainly could. So for a lifetime supply of pizza, give me the team that has the established quarterback that I know is still pretty good, as opposed to the 2 franchises that have kind of been stuck in the same rut since 1991.
All right, Russ, what's your answer?
Gonna go with the Packers. I mean, it's if it's not costing me anything for lifetime pizza, I get the safe bet. Got to take it every time.
Would that make you turn into a Packers fan for a little bit until they get that playoff win, just so you could win the lifetime supply of pizza?
Oh yeah, give me those dark green jerseys you got all day long. Give me that.
Listen to him during the Pack-A-Day stuff in the offseason. He's a Packers fan. He just doesn't know it yet.
Yeah, he just doesn't know it yet. Exactly. Ken, what about you?
Oh, let's see. Let's spin that.
Oh, we're spinning the wheel.
We're gonna see where that goes, and that's gonna be the one. We're looking at Lions. I wouldn't have expected that one, but it looks like Lions are the winner. So
CJ Stroud, why not?
Hey, it's
never know.
It's gonna happen. We've never actually won a playoff game in the NFC North, and it would be nice to see that at some point. Why not? The randomizer says so.
I'll say Packers. I'll stick with the home team, though. I think for all three of these franchises, the unknown moving forward, the Bears, Lions, and Packers, is very interesting, and it'll be worth keeping an eye on to see which team wins the playoff game next. Hopefully it's the Packers this season. That'd be great. Jacob, where can we follow you on Twitter and find your work?
Yeah, find me at Jacob Westendorf on Twitter. You can find me at Packer Report 66. And in the offseason, we didn't say this at the top, but Russ Brown is like a 3-year running co-host for me for the draft season. So me and Owen Reese and Russ Brown for, I think, the last 3 years. So hopefully that's something we can re-up when this offseason hits. But yeah, find me there. Find me on Mondays babysitting Ross Uglum and Jacob Morley, and then doing all kinds of different fun stuff as it pops up. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Russ actually put in a request for a new host, but yeah, he should be back on the pack.
Buy that, yeah. After 29-7 on Saturday, he probably wants a different one. So
Too soon, bro. Too soon.
Russ, where can we find your work?
At Russ NFL Draft. Smash the follow button, like I say every time. A lot of draft stuff, like talking Lions, but draft is where my heart is.
All right, Kent, where can we find you?
I am on Twitter at MathBomb. You can always find me covering the draft, and you already mentioned relative athletic scores. At one point, you can go see all that data at ras.football, ras.football. You can check out my work at Pro Football Network by trying the mock draft simulator there. That's at profootballnetwork.com/mock draft. You can go try to be your own GM. I updated it about 4 minutes before this podcast started, so hopefully nothing broke. But you can always reach out to me on Twitter, and you'll see a guy who's going to explain why guys like Rashawn Gary should be expected to succeed, and guys like Jay Sternberger were much bigger risks to succeed. And hopefully you enjoy that type of content, because I do it year round. It's my passion.
It's really great stuff. Guys, go follow Jacob. Go follow Russ. Go follow Kent. They are absolutely phenomenal. I appreciate you guys so much. Really quick, super chat came in. Thanks so much, Jerry. Start listening to the optimism around you. I don't think there was that much optimism around me today, but you've been a little too dark for me lately. I apologize. I promise, not positive, not negative, just realistic every single day, 365 days a year. That's going to do it for us. For Jacob Westendorf, Kent Lee Platte, Russ Brown, I'm Andy Herman. Make sure to check out the Pack-A-Day podcast every day, 365 days a year. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.